Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. It is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. My name is Morgan Colby. Rick Lemon is not with me today. He's currently in South Carolina partying at a beach house. If that's what you want to say. Rick, if you're listening, don't have too much fun without me. Today, we bring you our best value picks at the quarterback position for 2019. I'm so excited about this series because we're going to talk about guys who maybe are getting overlooked in drafts, who have a lot of value and that you can pick up later in drafts and understand that, okay, this guy probably will be a top player, but I'm going to get him a little bit later because I understand where things are going. So we're very excited to bring you this series. We're going to talk about quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends over the next 4 episodes as we prepare for a lot of shows coming up in August, a lot of content coming up in August. Before we get into our news segment, be sure to do the following. Head over to Twitter and follow us on Twitter at the FF Champs. Go to Instagram at the Fantasy Champions and follow us on there. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/the Fantasy Champions. And make sure you subscribe wherever you listen, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, anywhere you listen. And click the bell for notifications and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a review. Share this podcast with your friends. Let's get into the news. It has been an interesting week. This week particularly starts training camp for a lot of teams, whether it was on the 24th or whether it's on the 26th. Everyone starts at a different time. But it is the start of training camp week, so we're starting to get the trickling in of some news. Some guys on the bubble, some guys who are showing out in the beginning of training camp, some guys who maybe aren't doing too well, some guys are getting cut. So a lot of different things happening over the last couple days. It's just the early news cycle for the beginning of training camp. I was about to say spring training. But let's get into the first couple news points. So Coach Dan Quinn believes this year is going to be a contract year for his tight end Austin Hooper, and that he is, quote, ready to go to another level with his play in 2019. This is an extremely, extremely interesting point. I think that we've talked about Austin Hooper in the past and how high level he is as a player. He finished, I believe, at number 6. And I think that he is only going to take that next step. I don't disagree with Dan Quinn. This might be a little bit of early training camp hype, but I do believe that Austin Hooper is a player that can break out and play at an extremely high level in 2019. Where he's going is like the 14th or 15th round. So if you can snag Austin Hooper and get him on your fantasy team, he could be your George Kittle of 2019, where George Kittle had a good, year before, a good 2017 campaign, but it wasn't great. It didn't, show out or make you think that he was going to be a high-end player. But now you're looking at, Austin Hooper, who had a similar campaign, finished 6th or 7th, right around where Trey Burton finished, and he's a guy that can take that next step forward, finish in the top 5 or the top 3 among tight ends, and surprise a lot of people. He is also in a very, very good offense. So if Dan Quinn says that he is ready to go to another level, that means that Dan Quinn is probably going to encourage Matt Ryan to throw it to him. But I want to see how training camp plays out. I want to see how he performs in preseason and everything, and make sure that he is going to be a guy that is to that level. But to spend a 14th round selection on him as your tight end is not that bad. Speaking Wednesday, Coach Vic Fangio confirmed Philip Lindsay's wrist is ready to go, and he's ready for the start of camp. This is good news for people who like Philip Lindsay. It means that he is not going to be affected by this wrist injury. He's ready to go. He's not going to be held back. I believe we posted on our Instagram page the other day, who are you going to choose between Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay, and who's going to be the starting guy? Who's going to end up? Can Royce Freeman unseat Philip Lindsay? And we're going to find out in camp. Philip Lindsay is in a brand new system. He's got to learn all this stuff over again. He is taking reps with the first team right now. That was reported a couple days ago. So Philip Lindsay is ready to go. It's just, can he win that job again, which I think he's going to have to in order to be the starter. So we'll see what happens with Philip Lindsay. His wrist is something to keep an eye on as he goes about training camp, but he's ready to go. Emmanuel Sanders, who tore his Achilles midway through the season last year, he avoided the active/PUP list, which is the PUP list. So he avoided the PUP list to open training camp, and he is ready to go. I think that Sanders is a guy that has been extremely successful and extremely good in the time that he has played over the years, but I think Achilles injuries are extreme. Foot and Achilles injuries are extremely hurtful to wide receivers because most of the time, running backs are running backs. They run and they get the ball at the line of scrimmage and they run downhill. Wide receivers need quickness with their feet and they need to have good footwork. And when you have an Achilles injury, it really damages your ability to run. It's good to hear that he is ready to go and he's not going to be hurt for the beginning of camp, that he's been activated. He will be in a limited capacity, but that he's not going to start the season on the physically unable to perform list, which is what I was trying to say earlier. But he's not on that list to start training camp. That's a great sign for Emmanuel Sanders. And right now, Emmanuel Sanders is not going too high. So if you wanted to take a risk pick on Emmanuel Sanders, I wouldn't judge you for it, but he's definitely a player to keep your eye on as training camp goes along. The NFL announced it is not suspending Tyreek Hill, who was accused of assaulting his son earlier in the offseason. This is major news. I was literally shocked that Tyreek Hill did not get suspended for the things that he did. There have been guys who have done way lesser who have gotten suspended. So to find out that the NFL has decided not to suspend Tyreek Hill is absolutely crazy. I'm not going to comment on the opinion of whether he should have been suspended or not been suspended. I'm just going to give you the fantasy implications. He is now a top 6 wide receiver. I put him at number 6 on my draft rankings, and I think that Tyreek Hill is a top 6 receiver. He's probably going to be late second, early third round pick. And I think that nothing has changed about him. People act like he's missed all this time. No, he hasn't. He hasn't missed much of anything. He's going to be ready for camp. He's going to play, camp with the entire team for the course of the next 6-7 weeks before the season starts. So Tyreek Hill is going to be ready to go for the season. So to assume that he's just going to take a step back or he's going to be different in any way because of this whole saga is just asinine. He's the same player that he was. He's going to be a top 6 wide receiver, and that's the way he's going to be drafted. So I think without the suspension, it is absolutely surprising, but it does change things. It's going to move Travis Kelce back. It's going to move Damian Williams back. And it also moves down the likes of Demarcus Robinson, who guys have been putting actually really high on draft boards. And it also moves Mecole Hardman down because he was supposed to be the Tyreek Hill replacement. And so it moves him way down the list. And then you're talking about, a lot of other stuff happening behind the scenes because of that. But I think that a lot of guys move down the board in replace of Tyreek Hill. Do I think that this is going to hurt Travis Kelce and his value this season? No, I absolutely do not. I think it actually makes him a better tight end now that Tyreek Hill is on the field, because the only option that people were going to have to cover when Tyreek Hill was out was Travis Kelce. And so I think this does help Kelce. He will take a hit ADP wise, but outside of that, he's still going to be the same player, and he might even be better with Tyreek Hill on the field than not. So Tyreek Hill coming back has major impact on what a lot of people have been feeling about Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, Sammy Watkins. All those guys move down the board. Tyreek Hill moves up. Travis Kelce moves up. I think it's going to be it's a really good thing for fantasy, and it adds depth to the wide receiver position. Philip Lindsay was the running back, like I said earlier, to take first team reps at Denver's training camp. That's something to keep an eye on. It's the first time this training staff has seen Phillip Lindsay take first team reps, so we'll see the repercussions and how things kind of work out. Albert Breer is reporting some around the league believe that LeSean McCoy could be cut or traded before week 1. This is insane news. If a guy like LeSean McCoy was to be cut, there are a few teams out there that would probably take a look at McCoy. I would think that Tampa would take a look. I think that Houston would probably take a look. And so I think there's a couple of teams that would really take a look at LeSean McCoy in terms of making a trade or picking him up after he's been cut. But I do think that this would be huge for the backfield in Buffalo. I've talked about how it's cluttered. It has LeSean McCoy. It has the new running back, fourth round pick, I believe, in Devin Singletary, as well as, I believe, Frank Gore. So it's like there's a lot of moving pieces in Buffalo right now at the running back position. And I think when you look at the Bills, they're a team that I've been avoiding for running backs. But if LeSean McCoy is cut or traded, I think I'm definitely going to take a longer look at Devin Singletary. Not at Frank Gore. Frank Gore is done. But Devin Singletary is a perfect option for your fantasy team going into the regular season. It might take him a few weeks to jump out into that. It might take him a few weeks to jump into the starting lineup and do all that stuff. But I think Singletary can definitely overtake Frank Gore. So if that's what happens, because they also have TJ Yeldon, mind you. So you have to keep an eye on that as well. It's still a cluttered backfield, but I think Singletary gets more opportunity, and he's a guy to keep an eye on. Eagles signed running back Darren Sproles to a 1-year contract. So Darren Sproles returns to the team. This is horrible news for Miles Sanders. And for the likes of, not for Jordan Howard, definitely not Jordan Howard, but Miles Sanders is now going to get a decreased role because Darren Sproles is going to do the pass catching, Jordan Howard's going to do the running, and I think this Darren Sproles signing is more of an indictment on Jordan Howard's pass catching ability than it is anything else. But with Darren Sproles returning, he's going to definitely be the pass catcher. Jordan Howard's going to be the rusher. And my question is, what role does Miles Sanders have in this offense now that a guy like Darren Sproles has signed with the Eagles? A lot of people have been high on Miles Sanders, and I have been up and down. I've kind of liked Sanders. I've kind of not liked Sanders. We did our first mock draft of the year. I drafted Miles Sanders, and to me, it was a little bit of some rookie hype that I was reading and seeing on Twitter, but as well as understanding that Jordan Howard can't pass catch. They want a guy that can catch the ball through the air and be on the ground. That you saw that in Jay Ajayi, and so they want that to be Miles Sanders. But I think at this point, what you're going to see, they're probably going to hold 4 running backs. It'll probably be Miles Sanders, Darren Sproles, Jordan Howard, and my guess would be either Josh Adams or there's one other guy whose name is escaping me. But Miles Sanders is going to be the third running back on that roster. And as the third running back on the roster, a lot of people are going to forget about him. Maybe in a couple years he could be good. But right now, the fact that they signed Darren Sproles puts a large indictment on the development of Miles Sanders to this point. I could be very wrong. Miles Sanders could break out and have a really good year, but he's a guy to keep your eye on. Patriots placed Sony Michel on the physically unable to perform list to start the season after he got a knee scope earlier in the offseason. This is a little bit concerning. People can be taken off the PUP list at any time during training camp or the regular season. They can be taken off at any time. They're not held to that. But being put on the PUP list is kind of a little bit concerning for Sony Michel. He has had knee problems in college. He's had knee problems now in the NFL. And so this is why the Patriots drafted Damian Harris. Damian Harris has the ability. He's a lot better on the ground. He's like the Rex Burke. He's going to play the Rex Burkhead role. But I think for me, like when you look at Sony Michel, this is why they got Damian Harris, because Sony Michel has injury issues. And I think this does give a little value to Damian Harris going into the regular season, but this does not mean Sony Michel will not start week 1 or play week 1. This just means that he's not ready to go for training camp. They're going to keep an eye on him, and when he's ready to go, he will be back. I don't see this as a long foreseen problem that's going to be, affecting his week 1, week 2, week 3. But we'll see. You got to watch that situation and watch it develop. So keep an eye on Sony Michel. In other news, DeAndre Hopkins also placed on the PUP list. And this was a little bit surprising. He may just not be ready for camp. But the Texans are obviously a little bit worried about it. I don't think this should affect the way that you draft. I would keep a close eye on it, but I think he'll be ready for regular season week 1, and he'll be totally fine. The Bills also placed Tyler Kroft, who I believe he has a foot injury, but he was placed on the PUP list as well to start the season. So we're going to see if that is something also that jumps into the regular season. But 3 guys already, Sony Michel, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Kroft, all placed on the PUP list. Some people were interested in Tyler Kroft on the Bills because they saw some success with previous tight ends. So you might see that be a situation, but Tyler Kroft is a guy to keep your eye on in terms of if you're targeting him in fantasy drafts, which I wasn't, but keep an eye on Tyler Kroft and DeAndre Hopkins and Sony Michel on the PUP list. The Bengals signed Tyler Boyd to a 4-year, $43 million contract extension through 2023. Boy, does this place a large question mark on AJ Green. He hurt his foot last season. He had a toe injury. And going into this season, a lot of people were excited to see AJ Green come back and play. He's still the wide receiver 1, but this tells you a lot. The fact that AJ Green's going into a contract year this year, he hasn't re-signed with the Bengals, and they just extended Tyler Boyd for 4 years, and they haven't extended AJ Green. So this tells me that they believe in Tyler Boyd. They believe what Tyler Boyd can do, and they're putting a lot of question marks around AJ Green. So to me, I think that Tyler Boyd is definitely going to be a guy. I've been looking at Tyler Boyd for weeks now. I have been very interested in how he's going to perform and play, and the fact that they believe in him and they trust in him is huge for this season. But I also think it's a little bit of an indictment on AJ Green. Like, this guy's been hurt. He hasn't been able to stay on the field for full seasons. Is he going to live up to the way we want him to live up? Is he going to live up to the player that he can be, or are we just going to let him walk? So it should be interesting to see what they do with AJ Green as the season goes along. But to have 2 guys on your team, making $12 to $15 million a year at the wide receiver position is going to be difficult to pull off. So we'll see what the Bengals do with AJ Green, but Tyler Boyd, people should be excited. Bengals believe in him. I believe in him. He's a guy that I've been drafting, so go for it. And the last piece of news we have is the Cowboys have released Allen Hurns. It's not a big news piece, but Allen Hurns is going to change teams. I believe he was in Jacksonville first, and then he went to Dallas last year, and now he's a free agent. Ben Cutt, one of our first releases or cuts or whatever you want to call it of the year. So Allen Hurns definitely going to be a guy to keep your eye on to see where he lands, because he could be a good wide receiver 3 or 4 on a team. But he is no longer with the Cowboys. He did have an injury going into camp. Apparently that injury is cleared, and they just cut him for reasons of that he didn't fit the team, I guess. So we'll see what happens in the future with Allen Hurns and where he goes, and we'll keep an eye on that. But that does it for the news. Let's move into our best quarterback value segment. Like I said, in this series, we want to give you the players that we believe are great draft values for their ADP. Wherever their ADP is, that's their... obviously some guys get drafted higher than others. Right now, Patrick Mahomes is in some leagues a second round pick. Most leagues he's a 3rd or a 4th round pick. And so for Patrick Mahomes, I mean that's an overpay. Whereas some guys that I'm going to mention on this show are late round values, or guys in the middle of the draft that you can get that are extremely valuable. That are going to show up this year and play really well. These aren't sleepers. These are just guys that are outperforming their ADP, and so or have outperformed their ADP and will probably outperform their ADP this season. So let's get into it with our first one, Cam Newton. I have talked about Cam Newton on this podcast for several months with excitement. He is currently getting drafted as the 89th pick in fantasy drafts, according to Fantasy Pros. All of these ADPs are going to be based on Fantasy Pros, but he's going as the 89th pick. He's going as the 89th pick in drafts as the 9th quarterback off the board. This is an extremely good value to me. This is like, to get a quarterback of the caliber of Cam Newton in the 9th or 10th round is absolutely crazy. And I've talked about Cam Newton before on this podcast. He has been a player that has finished, I believe, 3 or 4 times in the top 5 in his career. And it's one of those weird things, and we see the similar situation with Matt Ryan, a little bit more extreme with Matt Ryan, but we see this similar situation with Cam Newton, where Matt Ryan, we see him every single year. He goes out, he has a really good year, and then he has a year where he ends up as like the QB 16. And then he goes out and he has another top 3 finish, and then he comes back and he's like mediocre again. And so you see that same situation with Cam Newton, where he goes out and he's a top 3 quarterback, and then he ends up being like a 10, 11, 12 quarterback. And then he goes out and he has another big year, and then he's like the 10, 11, 12 quarterback. And so he keeps bouncing back and forth between this, and it's becoming a trend with Cam Newton. So the thing that I'm noticing with Cam Newton is that this past year, it was his year where he was, number 12, and he didn't finish that high in the rankings for quarterbacks. And you have this guy finishing at that point. What does he do the following year? History says that he's going to be a top 5 quarterback. Last year, through 12 games, Cam Newton was a top 5 quarterback. And now you're going into, you're going into, 2019, and Cam Newton is now getting drafted as the 9th, 10th, 11th quarterback off the board. And there are guys that people want to take. Some people want to take Kyler Murray over Cam Newton. But I don't think that is, like to me, Cam Newton has proven in his career that he can be a top quarterback. He has proven that he can be a high-end guy that finishes in the top 5 and can produce for your fantasy team. We've seen it before. His MVP season, he was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football. A couple years later, he was like number 3. So it's like Cam Newton can be a top quarterback, and I think he can do it this year. He's got good talent around him. He has a good running back in Christian McCaffrey. He has 2 good wide receivers, DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. He's getting his tight end back. He has a good offensive line. The only question surrounding Cam Newton, and I think this is the reason why he's going in the 9th round, 10th round, is his shoulder. His shoulder got hurt in week 13-14 last year, and it affected the rest of his season. It's the reason why through 12 weeks in the regular season, Cam Newton was a top 3, top 4, top 5 quarterback, which is why he dropped. The shoulder injury was the reason why he dropped. And so for Cam Newton, he's a guy that I think is undervalued right now, and I think he's definitely a great value. If you can get Cam Newton in the 10th round, and know that you can fill out your roster with running backs and wide receivers in the first 9 or 10 rounds, and then be able to pick up Cam Newton in the 9th, 10th, or 11th round and get 8 or 9 players before him that are wide receivers and running backs, I mean, that is a perfect strategy for your team. In my drafts, I've been consistently running with Cam Newton and Austin Hooper as my quarterback and my tight end. No matter what position I fall in, I'm able to get either one of those guys if you draft right. And so I believe Cam Newton, right now I have him ranked, I believe it's 5 on my rankings. And I like him that much. I believe in him that much. I don't think the shoulder is going to be a problem. I think he's going to come out and he's going to be a good quarterback. Now, if you look at his numbers, they don't really... He usually gets between 3,700 and 4,000 yards. Usually gets between 25 to 30 touchdowns. So, he's probably going to put up those numbers passing. He's a great quarterback, but he's not prolific. He's not going to throw 50 touchdowns and 5,000 yards in one season. He's just not going to do that. He's thrown 4,000 yards once in his career, and that was the first year of his career. And so for me, I don't think he's going to reach. He might get 3,700 yards and about 26 touchdowns, and that's where he'll land. It's the 6, 7, 800 yards rushing and 5, 6 touchdowns that he's going to add to what he does as a quarterback. So it's like last year he was efficient through 12 games. He absolutely punished guys last year through the first 12 games of the season. And the last 4, it was just that shoulder injury. You saw it. He could only throw 10 feet in front of him. It was just bad. He couldn't throw deep down the field. He wasn't getting yards. He wasn't getting touchdowns. He was throwing interceptions. Like he just didn't look like the quarterback that he had been. And it was because of that shoulder injury. So early reports out of camp are that Cam Newton is ready to go. He looks good. He's ready to play. So we're going to see what happens. But in your drafts, go after Cam Newton. I'm telling you right now, he is a great value at pick in the 9th round, 10th round as a quarterback. He's a great value. He will be your Andrew Luck of this year. Last year I was able to get Andrew Luck 9th, 10th round every single time, and he turned out to be, a top 5, top 6 quarterback. And so I think this is going to be Cam Newton again. You can do that to get a guy as 9th, 10th quarterback off the board for him to finish in the top 5. Great value. Number 2 on our list, Carson Wentz. His current ADP is 92. And he's getting drafted as the 10th quarterback off the board, 1 spot behind Cam Newton. Now, Carson Wentz has been a good quarterback over the course of his time in the NFL. In 2017, he had arguably his best season of his career, and I think he only played 13, 14 games. But Carson Wentz is the type of quarterback that can get back to that MVP caliber play. Through those 12 games, he was the second best quarterback in fantasy, and I think the number 1 guy was Aaron Rodgers at the time. But Carson Wentz in 2017 showed us why we should be drafting him, and then he ended up tearing his ACL. He ended up going into this year. He had back problems all season. He was coming off this ACL injury, and it's like Carson Wentz just played different this year. Second year removed from the ACL injury, fully healthy with no back problems. People are reporting that he's fully healthy, ready to go for camp, that he's going to be, week 1 starter, ready to go. Carson Wentz is one of these guys that I believe can get back to that MVP level play. I think as the 10th quarterback off the board, there is a little bit of value there. It's not a huge amount of value. This is like if you pick him, you're not going to be like, oh wow, he jumped into the top 3. I think he can jump into the top 3. Do I think he will? I don't know. We have to see what he looks like in the first couple games of the season before I even make that prediction. But if Carson Wentz can get back to MVP level play, can get past these injuries, I think he'll be a decent quarterback to draft. And as the 10th quarterback off the board in round 10, early round 10 or mid round 10, like you're getting a very good quarterback. He's a guy you can start week 1 knowing that he'll get you 18, 19, 20 fantasy points if you're a 4-point per touchdown league. That's what he can do week 1. He's a guy that you can start week 1 if he has a good matchup and be okay with, and then draft maybe a more riskier guy like Josh Allen to stick behind him, hoping that he breaks out, similar to how some people did, like Rick did with Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees last year. So you could do that, or you could just draft Carson Wentz outright, but I think he's a good value at his draft pick. If he goes any higher, like if he falls into the 8th round, the 7th round as we get closer to the season, then he's a guy that I probably avoid just because he's going to be overvalued at that point. But I think right now, 10th round, it's a perfect spot to draft Carson Wentz. He's a similar player to Cam Newton, and I think both of these guys can jump back into the top 10, possibly the top 5 this year. So keep your eye on Carson Wentz. Number 3 is Jameis Winston. His current ADP is pick 125. And he's the 16th quarterback off the board. So he's not even getting drafted as a starter. Last year, he was a waiver wire quarterback. He was not able to... Jameis Winston is a roller coaster. He goes up and down and up and down, and he continues to, impress us with big games and be a QB1, and then all of a sudden he craps the bed and ends up like a QB3, and he just gets 5 points in the game. And it's like... You get that roller coaster. He's a little bit more consistent than some quarterbacks in this league are. I think he's a lot better of a fantasy quarterback than he is a real-life quarterback just because of his ability to rush. Jameis Winston has a lot of upside, though. And the reason why I say that is because you look at a guy like Cam Newton. Cam Newton, over the course of the last 5-6 years, the amount of time that he's been in this league, he's thrown 4,000 yards once. He's thrown 30 touchdowns, I believe, once. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but Cam Newton has been a guy like that over the course of his career, and he's not a prolific passer. Jameis Winston has the arm and the accuracy and the arm strength to be a prolific passer. He's a guy that can get 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, or 35 touchdowns in a season, and also rush for 600 yards and a couple of touchdowns and be that type of player. And what I'm looking for when you look for Jameis Winston is those rushing statistics. But I think last year, when you look at his numbers, when he was on the field, when Jameis Winston was on the field, he was a QB1. He was a QB1 most of the time. He was just pulled out for a lot of different games. And so pulling up his game logs right now, in games that he played fully, Week 6, he played a full game against Atlanta, 32 fantasy points. Week 7, he played a full game against Cleveland, 23 fantasy points. Week 11, he had 15 against the Giants. Week 12, he had 22 against the San Francisco 49ers. He had 22 against Carolina in Week 13, 19 against New Orleans in Week 14. Week 15, he had 4 against Baltimore, one of the best defenses in the league. That's expected. And then he had 14 against Dallas in Week 16 and 30 in Week 17 against Atlanta. And so it's like when you look at the games where he played fully, he was a QB1 a majority of the time. And I took out Week 4 and I believe it was Week 8 because those 2 games he didn't play full games. But when you look at Jameis Winston's numbers, it just shows you that he can be a QB1 if he's given the opportunity to do it full time. You know, even the year before, you saw him get a couple of 25, 20, 26-point games the season before. So I think for me, when I look at Jameis Winston, I think he has the arm, I think he has the talent, I think he has the ability to get himself into the top 5 of quarterbacks in fantasy football next year. I think he is a breakout candidate for 2019 at the quarterback position. I just think he's got to actually pull it off. And I think that has been kind of the biggest thing as you go into this season. He's one of the guys that I've been really looking at, but he's a perfect value. Like if you get it in the 13th round, if you get Jameis Winston as the 16th quarterback off the board, if you were able to like snag him in that round, like what is it, 13th, 14th round, if you're able to get him in that round and he is able to jump into that top 6, top 7 conversation, you're talking about a full 10 spot leap. He's getting 16th quarterback off the board. If he's like, you know, the 6th or 7th quarterback, he's jumping 9 or 10 spots. It's an incredible value late. Not a lot of people like Jameis Winston because of the up and down. If he plays a full season this year, he's not gonna do you wrong. And I think he's personally like the 6th best quarterback for 2019 if he stays healthy, if he stays on the field for the entire season and doesn't screw it up. And that's the biggest thing is it's not accuracy. It's not his inability to score fantasy points. It's the fact that he just makes bad decisions a lot of the time. And if Bruce Arians can fix that about Jameis Winston, he is a perfect value for 2019. Number 4 on our list is Jared Goff. His current ADP is 98, and he's the 12th quarterback off the board. Now, let me just say something about Jared Goff. I've talked about him on the show before. He's a guy that I absolutely love for fantasy football. The concerns with Jared Goff is that he's absolutely god-awful on the road. So if you draft him as your quarterback, maybe, round 10? If you draft him as a 12th quarterback off the board, 13th quarterback off the board in rounds 10 or 11, you're okay drafting him there, but you need to come up with a plan for your road games with Jared Goff because he's not going to perform in those games. And so I've explained why. You can go listen to our other quarterback episodes and find out why Jared Goff is one of those players that I don't trust on the road. But I think to look at a guy who through, I think it was 12 weeks of the season, it was really before Cooper Kupp got hurt, which was week 7, I believe. But Jared Goff was a part of one of the best offenses in football, and he was playing at a level that was like number 2 quarterback in fantasy. And he came at this point during the season where he took a little bit of a hit. And I think it was mostly road games and schedules that really affected Jared Goff. But when I look at the game logs for Jared Goff for this season, you see he was playing out of his mind through weeks 8, I think it was weeks 8 through 11, he played out of his mind. It was like 24, 27, 21, 35, and he played great. And then he just had some huge bust weeks on the road. And so it's like you have to, like for me, yes, Is he being undervalued? Yes. Is he a value pick at where he is as the 12th quarterback off the board? I mean, he's not even considered a starter. Yeah, he's a guy that I'm looking at and going, man, this is a tough pick. But I think if you get Goff and then you get another guy who plays well in the reverse spot, so you're a guy who you can start ahead of Jared Goff, you might be able to pull off a situation where you only are able to, you're able to get Jared Goff in home games as opposed to road games. A lot of his bust games were on the road. There was not many bust games at home. And so for him, he's a very good player that is being, I personally think he's a good quarterback that people are definitely looking at and undervaluing. They're saying, oh, you know what? That guy busted in so many games. He lost my championship because he only scored like 16 points in week 16. They're looking at him and they're saying, oh, he had a terrible Super Bowl. What type of player is he going to be in 2019? Yeah, I think people are saying those things about him, and it's pushing him down draft boards, and he could even be going later when the season starts, or when the draft, when drafts really start picking up in August. Jared Goff could be a guy that falls down that list. And so for me, I think Jared Goff is a great value pick, especially, as a 12th quarterback off the board, pick 98. You can snag him there and be safe. And the fifth and final quarterback on our board is Dak Prescott. I absolutely love Dak Prescott, and I didn't like him or Russell Wilson at the end of the season until I started looking at their numbers. The thing that popped out to me for Dak Prescott is consistency. He had 2 games where he scored, I think it was actually, 3 or 4 games where he scored under 14 fantasy points. Now, 14 fantasy points is not a good game for a quarterback, so take that as what you will. But I know Dak Prescott generally gets 15, 16, 17 points. I think he averaged 17 to 18 points per game last year. And at the quarterback position, if you are riding a quarterback all season long, and you're expecting, like a lot of teams in fantasy football don't stream quarterbacks. A lot of people don't want to take that risk of streaming quarterbacks and not have a consistent guy. But they end up with, players like we had a team last year that rode Phillip Rivers for the entire season. And so it's like he wasn't consistent. He had games where he was really bad. Dak Prescott also has games where he was really bad, but he consistently gets 16, 17, 18 points a game during the season. And he can also bring you that 22, 23, 24 point outing every once in a while. Last year, I think it was a down year for the Dallas Cowboys offense. I think that this year, going into this season, you have some improvements offensively. You have Amari Cooper for a full season and a full off season. Dak Prescott's able to work with him. So I think, consistency is huge for me with Dak Prescott, and the reason why I think he's a value pick. In the 3 years he's played in the NFL, he's finished between 8 and 12, and right now his current ADP is 129 as the 17th quarterback off the board. And as the 17th quarterback off the board, that's a guy that makes me a little bit, obviously people are like, oh man, he's not going to be as good as you think he is, but people are drafting Dak Prescott at his floor. And I think if you draft Dak Prescott at his floor of what he's going to do, you can get him and almost guarantee that he's going to be better than his floor. I think that he's a guy that definitely can play a lot better with Amari Cooper in that offense. They still got that good offensive line. They still got one of the best. I mean, obviously, with Zeke not playing, would really damage the team. But reports are that Zeke is not going to bring this holdout into the regular season. So for me, I think Zeke will be there. I think that Amari Cooper will obviously be there. I think that offensive line's really good, and I think that you have, a couple of good tight ends that you can work with. And so for me, Dak is a very good pick. Is he going to finish in the top 5? No. I think he could go 7, 6, 7, 8 again this year and play in a really good offense. I mean, Dak is one of those guys that requires the talent around him to succeed, and when he has a top 7, top 8 year, it usually means that he's getting 20 points a game. And consistency is really what you're looking for at the quarterback position if you want to have a quarterback for a week-to-week basis. And Dak Prescott, I mean, there were a bunch of quarterbacks like Andrew Luck this year who had 25, points per game over the course of like 8 weeks in a row. But then he had like 3 or 4 weeks where he just got under 10 fantasy points and absolutely crapped the bed. And as Dak Prescott, He didn't get you those long stretches of 25, 26 points per game, but he got you the 10, 11, 12 points instead of dropping all the way down into the basement of like 4, 5, 6 points. He had 4 or 5 points twice this season. In 28, he had 4 or 5 points twice in 2018. The rest of the time he had either 10 points or above. So 10 points blows for a quarterback, 14 points blows for a quarterback, 16 points blows for a quarterback. I'm looking for 20 from my quarterback on a week-to-week basis, but if you want to ride one quarterback all year, you can't go wrong with Dak Prescott. I think people are undervaluing him, and they're not looking at the true picture of what Dak Prescott is. You can draft him at his floor, get him at 129. He, in some drafts, may not even get drafted because he's the 17th quarterback off the board. So he is definitely a value pick. And that'll do it for the value picks episode. We got 1 Cam Newton, 2 Carson Wentz, 3 Jameis Winston, 4 Jared Goff, and 5 Dak Prescott. Be sure to listen on Thursday as we move into our second episode on value picks in 2019 drafts. Talk to you Thursday, Fantasy Champs.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.